And that what I just described to you very briefly is the root cause of all drama, chaos, and conflict everywhere in the world. So what I do in the NBL program is I show people how they're unconsciously giving away their energy. And I give them better habits and practice to stop doing it. And when you stop giving away your energy, your need to steal the energy of other people goes away because you don't need it. And it's in that process that you develop your emotional intelligence. You become more conscious of what's going on in you and around you, and you become a more inspirational leader.
What's going on, guys? It's your hobby, David St. Clair Speaks, and you are now tuned in to the St. Clair Speaks Show.
You are now tuned in to the St. Clair Speaks Show.
Welcome back to the St. Clair Speaks Show podcast. I'm your host, Yahavi St. Clair, sitting down with another incredible guest. This guest is really interesting. Today, we are sitting down with Phil Johnson. We are going to dive into emotional intelligence. Now, quick backstory on Phil. For the past 21 years, Phil has been an executive coach, helping executives and organizations bet on themselves by developing their emotional intelligence to become the best version of themselves. Phil is also the founder of the Master of Business Leadership Executive Program, really showing people the value and the importance of emotional intelligence. Really excited to talk about all things emotional intelligence and why emotional intelligence is getting more attention now than ever before. With that being said, Phil, I want to welcome you onto the St. Clair Speak Show. Please give our listeners a 3 to 5 minute introduction on yourself, your brand, your business, and all the incredible work that you've been doing over the years.
Hi, thanks. It's a pleasure to be on your show. So as you say, I've been an executive coach. I've coached executives and organizations all over the world for the last 21 years, helping them to become more emotionally intelligent, become better leaders, and raise their level of consciousness. In through the program I've called the Master of Business Leadership. Um, and the development of emotional intelligence is a critical skill that we never got through our education and employment system. And it's more important now than ever because we're facing a tsunami of change with a 500 million year old brain that doesn't like change. So some scientists estimate that in this century, we could experience the equivalent of roughly 500 years worth of change. 20,000 years worth of change. So change is increasing at an exponential rate, and we really need to be working to develop our emotional intelligence to deal with the fear and anxiety that change creates in us. So that's what I've been doing.
Nice. Okay. So I want to dive right into this because there's so many different avenues where I could get pulled to talk about emotional intelligence. So one of the first questions I have for you is, what is emotional intelligence and how is it developed?
A very simple way to look at emotional intelligence is it's the ability to move through the fear, the anxiety that change always triggers in us. There's a biological resistance we have to change. Um, and there's also a sociological resistance we have to change. But just think of it as the emotional labor that we need to do when we take an action that moves us outside of our comfort zone to move through the fear and anxiety that triggers in us towards what it is we're trying to achieve. If we're unwilling to do that emotional labor, we get stuck in our comfort zone, which creates all sorts of other problems. So emotional intelligence is the ability to feel the fear that change triggers in us and move through it rather than allowing the fear to control us, allowing the fear to keep us from moving forward.
So it sounds like there has to be this sense of awareness, right? For you to actually know how you feel, because people get caught into this autopilot mindset and they neglect the anxiety and how they're feeling, and they put their feelings aside. So can anyone develop emotional intelligence, and what does those practices look like?
Yes, anyone can develop their emotional intelligence. And it begins by developing an emotional connection to a desired result, something you want to achieve that motivates you to leave your comfort zone to go get it. And that motivation needs to be stronger than the fear that's going to be generated when we step outside of our comfort zone. So you have to develop, there's something you've got to want, and you've got to have an emotional connection to achieving that. That really becomes the fuel for the journey. That becomes your motivation to move through your fear, as opposed to allowing your fear to stop you from moving forward.
Mm. Yeah, because fear could be crippling. It could be crippling if you let it.
Quite frankly, most people don't yet have that emotional connection to a desired result that's greater than their fear. So their unwillingness to change um, often leads to them trying to change everybody else. If we're not willing to change ourselves, then often we revert to using some type of position-based power to control and manipulate others to get them to change because we're unwilling to. And unfortunately, that's how we've been operating for a very, very long time. We relied on position-based power to force others to change. And it actually leads to the drama, chaos, and conflict that creates toxic work environments. The current level of employee engagement, according to Gallup, is around 13%. So people are working in very toxic environments where they're afraid, they're very um, they're very there's lots of anxiety. Low levels of employee engagement are costing the U.S. economy over $1 trillion a year. And Gallup's also determined that there's almost a one-to-one correlation between the level of employee engagement and the level of customer engagement, meaning that if your employees don't feel safe, if they're not engaged in what they're doing, neither are your customers.
Right. So speaking of, you brought up an interesting type, like you mentioned change. What would you say are the two primary motivations for change? What's going to make someone change? Is it, the depression, their circumstances? Where does that motivate?
Yeah, there's only two sources of motivation that will cause us to want to leave our comfort zone. One is pain, the other one is passion, meaning you've got to have an urgent desire for better results than you're currently getting, or you have to have a passion and motivation to a desired result that motivates you to want to leave your comfort zone to go get it. And hardly anybody's connected with their passion. So for the most part, the thing that motivates most people to want to get better results is pain, is an urgent desire for better results. So that becomes the motivation or the fuel for the journey. That becomes the motivation to do the emotional labor of moving through our fear and anxiety on the way to achieving better results.
So I kind of want to look at this from a different angle. You mentioned, the motivation. You also mentioned the workplace emotional intelligence. Should, in your opinion, more conversations about emotional intelligence be taking place in the corporate setting? Because, I've worked in corporate and personal training for about 9.5 years. And, that's something that we never really talked about, right? We never talked about emotional intelligence. We only talked about the biomechanics of the body, but there's just so much more than just the biomechanics of the body, right? There's also the emotional intelligence. And I've heard this before. Sometimes we store these emotions in our body, right? That's where our hip flexors get tight, our lower back gets tight, this and that. And in some way, somehow it's connected to emotional intelligence. Can you talk on that, Phil?
Sure. When we're being controlled by our ego-based fear, our body goes into survival mode. And actually, let me just explain a little bit. Whenever we take an action that moves us outside of our comfort zone, there's a part of our old lizard brain called the amygdala, been around for 500 million years. And it's been trying to keep us safe and alive by making sure we never leave the safety of our cave, never leave the safety of our comfort zone. And if we do, it secretes a hormone into our bloodstream called cortisol. And that causes the executive center of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, to shut off. And we go into what psychologists refer to as an amygdala hijack. We go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. And we often say and do things we later regret. But in the moment, we're in the midst of that reaction. Some people lash out, some people run away, some people freeze like a deer in the headlights. And when that happens in conflict situations, sometimes people die. And when it happens in business or personal situations, relationships die. We burn trust. So as an analogy, if you think of your amygdala as a very frightened 4-year-old child, the development of our emotional intelligence acts like a big brother or a big sister to quiet that amygdala response down and better enable us to feel the fear and anxiety that change and innovation always triggers in us and move through it towards what it is we're trying to achieve, as opposed to allowing that anxiety to keep us trapped in our comfort zones.
So, very good point. I want to ask you this. I don't believe there's no such thing as a silly question, but at what age should we really start paying attention to emotional intelligence? Say someone that's say a kid at 5 years old, should parents have conversations like that? And what does that look like now for kids?
That's a great question. We should be teaching people, we should be helping people develop their emotional intelligence from birth. The challenge is that nobody helped their parents develop their emotional intelligence. So the lack of the emotional intelligence of the parents gets transferred down, unfortunately, to the children. So everybody needs to be developing their emotional intelligence. Lots of times kids take their cues from the adults in their life. There's something I want to say to kind of help put this in perspective, and it's I've been proving this all over the world, and I'll give you an example of a company that's currently doing over $1 trillion a year in sales. That their primary hiring focus is on the search for people with above average levels of emotional intelligence. But before I tell you who that is, let me tell you the underlying focus of my coaching, and it's energy physics. And I've been proving what I'm about to say to you all over the world for the last 21 years. When we're born, we're not born with a conscious mind. We are born with an unconscious mind. We don't start to become conscious until we're about a year or so old. But we immediately start wiring up our brain. We immediately start creating the neural network pathways in our brain that become our habits in order to survive, in order to get food, all of that kind of stuff. And a lot of those habits we start developing are habits that cause us to unconsciously give away our energy to other people. And we do it in a myriad of ways in how we communicate, listen, take responsibility, make decisions, all sorts of ways. But the important thing is that when we give away our energy, we have to be replacing the energy we're giving away by trying to steal energy from other people. So that dynamic is going on inside of everybody, everywhere, all over the world, all the time, unconsciously. And that, what I just described to you very briefly, is the root cause of all drama, chaos, and conflict everywhere in the world. So what I do in the NBL program is I show people how they're unconsciously giving away their energy. And I give them better habits and practice to stop doing it. And when you stop giving away your energy, your need to steal the energy of other people goes away because you don't need it. And it's in that process that you develop your emotional intelligence. You become more conscious of what's going on in you and around you. And you become a more inspirational leader. So go ahead.
Phil, that is a very interesting point, because now it's like I'm thinking of conversations that I've had with people in the past, and I'm like, man, I feel that person feel like they took all my energy, right? And there's just some people you talk to, it's like, man, I just feel so charged up, so refreshed, and energy is contagious. And that's the thing, energy is contagious. So
it's called emotional contagion.
yeah, I got to definitely protect my energy for sure, because now looking back, it's like, man, it's kind of like, it makes me think of, someone out the blue that say that, they need advice. So they call you and they're feeling down, right? Oh, you're a positive influence, but, at the same time, they need your energy, right? They need that, that energy.
Misery likes company.
Yeah.
So what they're actually doing unconsciously, is they're trying to get you to raise your walls. They're trying to get you to become resistant, judgmental, or attached to the outcome, so that you can give them your energy. See, victims can't exist in isolation. They travel in packs. They're each other's negative energy food, but they don't like each other. They don't trust each other, and they can never lower their walls around each other. But they need each other. They have a codependent relationship. So when you think of kids, getting back to kids, as they go through school, and what a horror show grade school and high school could be, it's really they're clumsy attempts to try and control and manipulate others to steal their energy, because they're unconsciously giving away their own. As they get older, they just get better at it, and it becomes less obvious. But it's very obvious in grade school and high school that the kids are simultaneously giving away their energy to fit in, and they're subsequently needing to steal energy to replace the energy they're giving away. And that's what creates the drama and chaos and the conflict from an early age.
The last thing I would probably add on that point is, I forgot where I read this. I read this in an article, and someone was saying that, with kids, they have a lot of energy, right? The most energy they'll ever have is at that young age, because they have so much stored energy, and they're sitting at a desk for 8 hours in some cases. They have their recess break, but about say 40 hours a week, just like the average American if they're working a full-time job, but they're at that desk, and that stored energy it's kind of like boxed in, and it's not released. And if you're not doing any sort of outside activities outside of that to release that energy, I mean, like Phil, I don't want to talk about the whole school shootings, but all these emotions, right? They get suppressed. They're not talked about enough. So that's where I find it really interesting with emotional intelligence with kids, because a lot of these kids are struggling. You know, I was a personal trainer. I will end it on this point. I worked with this kid. I'll never forget. He was 11 years old. He was suicidal. He's 11 years old and he was suicidal because he was getting bullied at school. So for me, it's like, man, like there's no age limit on that, right? So it's just really unfortunate. But
yeah, that's it's we're in a lot of trouble, and our educational system and our employment system has done nothing to prepare us for the accelerating rate of global change. We really need to be focusing on the development of our emotional intelligence to deal with the dramatically changing world in which we live. Without the development of our emotional intelligence, we don't have the ability to deal with the fear, the anxiety that the challenges we face trigger in us. We need our emotional intelligence to be able to take those challenges and look at them, turn them into opportunities for growth. So the development of our emotional intelligence really represents the future of organizational development. So let me tell you about this company that's currently doing over $1 trillion a year in sales every year. And their primary focus is on hiring people with above average levels of emotional intelligence. That company is Apple. That's why you walk into an Apple store, that energy you feel is an example of a more emotionally intelligent environment. They're not trying to sell you anything. They want to try and understand your pain and, if possible, offer a solution. Whether you buy anything or not is secondary to their desire to want to serve you. They want you to have a great experience, and maybe you'll tell your friends, and they'll tell their friends. That energy is a very different energy from the energy in most of the stores surrounding it. So more and more companies, Apple, Google, Southwest Airlines, JetBlue, Infosys, Whole Foods, FedEx, Costco, and others, are hiring, developing, and promoting emotional intelligence. It's an ability that is fundamental to success, both from a career and a corporate perspective. Let me give you an example. Let me give you a numeric example of the difference between IQ and EQ, intellectual intelligence and emotional intelligence. So intellectual intelligence is something you're born with. If you have a high IQ, your parents have a high IQ, and their parents have a high IQ, and you inherited those genes. And emotional intelligence isn't something you inherit, it's something you develop. So here's the analogy. Think of intellectual intelligence as somebody giving you $10,000 a day for 31 days. So at the end of 31 days, you've got $310,000. Now think of emotional intelligence as a penny that doubles in value every day for 31 days. So day one, you've got a penny. Day two, you've got 2 pennies. Day three, you've got 4 pennies. Day 31, you've got $10.7 million. The point is that it doesn't take any more effort to go from day 30 to day 31 than it did to go from day 1 to day 2. So it's a building process. And in this analogy, day 40 is over 5 billion, day 50 is over 5 trillion. So the point is that whereas our ability to do intellectual labor is fixed genetically, there is no limit to the development of our emotional intelligence. The ROI in developing our emotional intelligence keeps getting greater and greater and greater and greater. And it actually multiplies the effectiveness of intellectual intelligence.
That was actually one of the questions I was going to ask you next, was the difference between EQ and IQ. Swinging back to when you mentioned Apple, I thought about something. Even in the job search today, you apply for a job, you go through, the standard, fill out your information, but they ask you these personalized questions in these scenarios. Like, so I guess that's how they're finding the right candidates. Can you talk on the whole personalized quote unquote survey on that?
Sure. And I actually help organizations do exactly what you're describing, to get a sense of somebody's level of emotional intelligence. You can ask them things like, why is this position important to you? And how good are you at asking for help from others? How good are you at accepting help from others? When's the last time you were embarrassed? What did you do? How did you handle it? What motivates you? What energizes you? So these are questions that can give you insights into somebody's current level of emotional intelligence, but also the more emotionally intelligent you become, the better able you are to spot it in other people. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot. That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. 'Cause I was always curious because they say, oh yeah, this. Don't worry, these questions won't really affect this, that, and the third. But I know deep down inside, it's like you want to make sure that someone's the right fit. So I get it. It makes a lot of sense.
There's a saying that people are hired for their IQ and experience, and they're fired for a lack of emotional intelligence. So our employment system has focused predominantly on IQ and experience. But then when you get into the roles, it's how are people able to work with you? As how collaborative are you? What kind of energy do you bring into the environment? How do you handle change? It's a big challenge. In the accelerating rate of global change is a massive fundamental problem in all organizations, and we're terrible at it. Where if you take a look, about over 80% of all organizational development initiatives fail. I mean, and if you want evidence of that, just look out your window. We have to become much better at dealing with the anxiety that change creates in us, and that requires the development of our emotional intelligence.
I got a good question for you.
Cool.
Being on this topic, prior to me hopping on this interview, I had an introduction meeting with someone, and she was telling me that her mother and like she's creating, like she's in the industry of mental health, of course, and she's creating content about grieving. And I told her, like, I recently heard this quote, and I've been hearing this all week. If you mourn the dead too long, they'll take you with them. So I want to talk to you about emotional intelligence attached to grief, and help you maybe just healthy ways to grieve with emotional intelligence, because people say, oh no, I'm fine, but they're suppressing that, right? So they're waving you off, they're saying they're okay, but deep down inside they're really crying behind closed doors, or their life's in shambles. So what does that look like with emotional intelligence into play with grieving, actually respecting your emotions and going about that in the healthiest way possible?
I'm gonna say something to you that's gonna knock your socks off. It is absolutely true. We don't die. Our body dies. And the energy that is us simply leaves the body. We're not living life. We are life. Living for a brief 100 years or so, if we're lucky, in this shell of a body. Every cell in our body dies and is replaced at least once in every 7-year period. Every organ, every brain cell, every heart cell, every muscle, every bone, everything dies and is replaced at least once, and in some cases many times, in every 7-year period. So there isn't a single cell in your body, not one, that was there 7 years ago. Yet you remain. How can that be? How can that be? It's because you're not your body. You're the energy that inhabits your body. And your body will wear out. Your body will die, like it's been dying off and on from birth. And then the energy that is you, the unique vibration that is you, will simply exit that body. Energy can't be created or Einstein. Energy can't be created or destroyed. It just changes form. So we have a responsibility to take care of our body, to fuel our body. But it's eventually going to wear out. See, every cell in your body is vibrating at exactly the same frequency. And nobody else's body is vibrating at that frequency except yours. That's like your social insurance number in the universe. That's who you are. You are the energy vibration that is inhabiting your body.
Right.
And the challenge really is when we start unconsciously giving away, and I'll give you an example, when we start unconsciously giving away our energy, that creates the need to replace the energy by stealing it from others, and that creates the drama, chaos, and conflict that we see everywhere in the world. That is the root cause of all drama, chaos, and conflict, war everywhere in the world. So learning to stop doing that is the solution to all drama, chaos, and conflict everywhere in the world. Let me give you an example of how we give away our energy. This is one of the NBL habits called authentic listening. The key to authentic listening is not to take anything personally. How somebody feels about you, whether they like you or whether they hate you, has nothing to do with you. It has to do with what's going on inside of them. But if how we feel about ourselves is based on how somebody else feels about us, who's running our life, us or them?
It's my life, so I'd say me.
No, if you're giving away your energy, if how you feel about yourself is based on whether or not somebody likes you or not,
Oh, sorry.
who's running your life, you or them?
Oh, no. I mean, if that's the case, then they would be considered to be running my life if I'm
Right.
basing
You're
it.
giving away your energy to them to determine how you should feel about yourself. If they like you, you like you. If they don't like you, you don't like you. So that's just one of the ways we're unconsciously giving away our energy. And what I'm describing is social media. We bend over backwards to put our best face forward to get people to like us so that we can like ourselves. And that's just one of the ways that our energy is drained off of us, causing us to need to try and steal energy from others. And often it's family members or people we work with or other people we know. But that's where the dynamic starts.
That meant Phil. I was surprised you landed a plane right there because you're going somewhere now with, especially with social media. I do want to swing back to giving your energy. I didn't think about that, but it's so true. You know, I was guilty of that, not even knowing I was doing it. Now thinking about it, I'm like, man, yeah, right. Like, it, we are. It's easy for us to be hard on ourselves, right? If we experience some type of shortcoming, and we're beating ourselves up and celebrating yourself enough and giving yourself grace and compassion in that light, and you're beating yourself up. So I want to talk to you about social media, because we live in a time, especially with social media, creates a lot of comparison, right? A lot of need for instant gratification. Then it's so funny because with Apple and this iPhone, they have this screen time, so you get to see what who said it, Dr. Miles Monroe, how you spend your time and how you manage your time is a reflection of your life. So I'm looking at my screen time, right? And I was looking at these apps. I'm like, no way I'm in this app for 4 hours a day. No way. So this is, and it's also the same, it's kind of like in the same breath of what you give your energy to, right? You scroll up and down all day. I'm getting a little fired up about this because this is just the everyday person. Everyone's doing this, right? But how can we break out of that matrix, Phil?
Okay. So when we do this kind of stuff, we get these little chemical dopamine hits in our brain. We get these little attaboys or attagirls. And it's addictive. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention is that we're only actually conscious about 3 to 5% of the time. Think about that. We're only actually conscious of the choices we're making about 3 to 5% of the time. The rest of the time, we're relying on our unconscious habits to drive our behavior and our results. So that's why, for instance, you don't have to think about how to tie your shoes anymore. I mean, when you were a kid learning how to tie your shoes, it was a horror show. But now you just do it automatically because you've mastered the ability to tie your shoes. It's gone from being a conscious activity to an unconscious habit. It's through a process called automaticity. So whatever we practice long enough gets converted from a conscious activity to an unconscious habit. Same thing with, for instance, driving a car. If you think about how difficult it was when you first started to learn to drive a car, now you get in your car and stuff happens and you're not even thinking about it anymore because you've mastered it. You've become unconsciously competent at driving a car. And that's like our unconscious mind is stronger, faster, and takes less of our metabolic energy than our conscious mind. But the conscious mind is where we can start to change our trajectory and through practice, through repetition, develop new, better unconscious habits. So, ask me another question.
No, that's a very good point. My question was about the whole social media, and you mentioned like the dopamine and things and that such, but the need for being on social media.
Yeah, we want to fit in. We want to. It's actually we're driven by ego-based fear. Our ego wants us to feel better than or less than, but never equal to. Our ego never wants us to be in the present moment. It always wants us to be focused on some potentially future better moment, which, by the way, is never going to arrive because there's never going to be a future moment. There's always just this present moment or some past moment. So we're really not in the present moment very often at all. So we've got this yap voice going on in the back of our mind constantly all the time, telling us we're great or we're terrible, and that's causing us to give away our energy. We're just unconscious. So developing our emotional intelligence and doing the emotional labor that requires raises our level of consciousness about what's going on in us and around us. See, the results we're getting are simply a reflection of our current level of consciousness. We cannot get results that are better than our current level of consciousness. If we want better results than we're currently getting, we have to raise our level of consciousness. And that occurs in the process of developing our emotional intelligence.
I want to talk to you about this. So there is a couple of books that I've read. Three of my favorite books: The Power of Your Subconscious Mind, Dr. Joseph Murphy; The Power of Positive Thinking, Norman Vincent Peale; and The Secret. And one thing I love about these books is, of course, it's about, really taking control of your mind. But all three books highlight something, and I believe it's emotional intelligence, because they talk about, in order for you to manifest successfully, it's being aware of two things: your thoughts, another is your feelings, right? So we attract what we feel about us. So can you talk to us on that, Phil?
Yeah, that's what I was saying, that we first of all have to develop an emotional connection to a desired result, to a thought, to a vision of a desired result. We have to combine the desired result we're trying to achieve with a strong emotion. Okay, let me give you some examples. Thomas Edison, 1800 experiments to invent a light bulb. And somebody says, Jesus, Tommy, that's a lot of failure. He says, what do you mean? I just learned 1,799 ways not to make a light bulb. I didn't know how long it was going to take, but my objective was always to invent a light bulb so people could see at night and all sorts of stuff. Walt Disney got turned down by over 2,000 banks before he was actually able to get enough funding to begin construction of Disney World. And every time he got turned down, he'd change his presentation and go into another bank and get turned down again. And that happened over and over and over again. And he actually died before Disney World construction was completed. And somebody at his funeral said, geez, isn't it too bad Walt never got a chance to see his dream come true? And the guy said, well, yeah, he really did. He saw it before any of us. Because if he hadn't already seen it, smelt it, felt it, tasted it, he couldn't have endured what he had to endure, the emotional labor, so the rest of us could see it. So that the development of an emotional connection to something you want to achieve, something you want to create, is the starting point, is the fuel for the journey. It's the gas you put in your car so the car can run. If you don't have that motivation, if you don't have that emotional connection to a desired result that's greater than your fear, you're not going anywhere. You may want better results than you're currently getting, but you will not be willing to do the emotional labor of moving through the fear and anxiety that's going to require in order to achieve those results.
Very interesting point. My last question, I guess, would be, where do you see the future of emotional intelligence? Do you see more spotlight on emotional intelligence? Do you see practices? Do you see it more in the educational space? Kids talking about it, like, exercises and such. Where do you see emotional intelligence in the next maybe 20 to 50 years?
This is a good place to wind this conversation up. Emotional intelligence is going to become a multi-trillion-dollar industry. The development of emotional intelligence is fundamental to our ability to survive as a species beyond this century. Right now, we don't have the ability to deal with the drama, chaos, and conflict that's being created by the accelerating rate of global change. And we desperately need to be developing our emotional intelligence. quite frankly, we're at a tipping point as a species on the planet. There isn't a single other species that wouldn't be better off if humanity didn't exist. In relative terms, we've been on the planet for less than a half of 1 second. And in that time, we've destroyed the climate. We're having to deal with things like CRISPR-Cas9, gene editing technology, AI, other pandemics, and we do not have the emotional intelligence to be able to do that. Mark Twain once said, if the only way mankind can learn is through experience, I see no hope for mankind. In other words, if the only way we can learn to not put our hand on the stove is by putting our hand on the stove, that assumes we're going to be around to learn from it. And a lot of the challenges we're going to be facing and are facing, you don't get a do-over. You got to get it right the first time. So we need to develop the emotional intelligence and wisdom to be able to not put our hand on the stove. So we have a massive, we need to change our trajectory. We need to change the way we handle change. And that's going to require the development of our emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence isn't a solution to the accelerating global changes we face. It is the only solution to the changes we face.
Oh man, what a discussion. This was really good. Phil, this was a lot of fun. Man, like I'm super excited for anyone that was either, watching or streaming this episode. What a conversation. Phil Johnson, any closing thoughts? Any closing thoughts for the audience?
Yeah, I would ask everybody listening to this to bet on themselves by developing their emotional intelligence. They won't regret it. So my wish for everybody is that they start to work on developing their emotional intelligence. The ROI is remarkable. So there.
That's good. Man, I'm so glad we had the opportunity to do this. All right, so for everyone else, I want to thank you for watching, streaming, however you're consuming this amazing content. Like I always say, what good is information if we don't apply it? Apply these practices for emotional intelligence and create the lifestyle that you want. With that being said, I will catch you in the next episode. This is the St. Clair Speak Show.